John, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me.
Not a problem. So you talk about in this article that you talk about Frady Pat and Shady Katie. That no, they're not Halloween costumes or scary clowns. Talk a little bit about this article and kind of the race that we're seeing here. A lot of the polls have them neck and neck with just under a month to go.
Yeah, and it's one of those key races that people are talking about in terms of control of the United States Senate for the next session. So it's a very, very closely watched race. Very expensive race right now, the most expensive in the nation. Probably going to end up spending $80 million on this thing. And in Pennsylvania, it's despite all the television ads, it is still not getting the bright clique lights that the presidential race is, and that's too bad. Now, because it is an important race, because it is both nationally and for the state, people really ought to take a look at it. I think what I tried to do today was draw some attention to it by using sort of the silly aspects of the campaign that both campaigns and their backers are using by putting pejorative nicknames on the candidates. Hopefully that will draw a little bit of focus and get people looking at these two.
I actually remember, I don't know if you mentioned this in your article, but I remember a couple months back, Senator Toomey tried pinning Katie McGinty as the too liberal, calling her Philly McGinty, and considering she was for the sanctuary status of Philadelphia, not because of her strong Philadelphia accent, but rather for her being in favor of sanctuary cities. But John, once again, this is John Cole here for WHIP Radio. But in your piece, one thing I like that you mentioned, in the last 10 days, we've seen 6 different polls, and boy, are they all over the place. And Quinnipiac has Toomey up 8 points. Franklin and Marshall has McGinty up 6. Monmouth has it tied. McGinty up 4 in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. CBS News having it tied. And Susquehanna at +4 for Toomey. What should we believe right now? Because quite frankly, this is going to go down to the last day, you have to imagine.
Yeah, it looks that way, John. And the thing about polls, and people I think by now are aware of this, methodologies within each poll often vary, and you can put in the same data and end up with different results, and this race is a good example of that. So the safest way to kind of gauge where things are is to take an average of respected polls, and when you do that, you get, in this race, a virtual tie, at least within the margin of error, and that does indicate that it's hard to imagine that anything violent is going to happen in this race, unlike the presidential race where things violent happen every other day. So, yeah, I think this is going to go right down to the wire. Now, there's 2 things that are coming up that, if they get some attention, could have an impact, and that's 2 debates. Both sides have agreed to do 2 debates. The first one is in Pittsburgh Monday night at KDKA. It will be made available for broadcast statewide. So somebody in every market is going to at least have the opportunity to air it. And then the second debate is the following week in Philadelphia. So that might bring some clarity to, and hopefully some balance to, information voters are getting other than the negative ads that both campaigns are running.
What kind of numbers do you think we should expect to see from these debates, considering the first debate between Secretary Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump had about 84 million, which broke the record for most watched presidential debate ever? This is, like you mentioned, the most expensive race in the nation, and we've seen commercial after commercial. If you live in the state of Pennsylvania, you see Pat Toomey's face and Katie McGinty's face often, but how many people do you think will actually tune in for this debate?
I think it's going to be real low, to be candid, because outside of the hosting stations in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, I imagine stations in other markets are not going to break into their prime time to air it live. So it might appear at odd times in the morning, late at night, on the weekend, something like that. So the pressure is going to be on voters to try to find your local station that's interested in airing this, and either tape it or TiVo. Do people still TiVo? I don't know. Somehow,
I don't know if people still end up using TiVo.
Is it DVR?
Yeah,
is that
DVR.
DVR TiVo.
But somehow, find a way to see it, and that might help voters decide.
We're talking to John Baer from the Philadelphia Daily News, covers politics for them. John, what do you think the implications are of Pat Toomey holding out a complete endorsement of Donald Trump, if any? Certainly Katie McGinty has been hitting him hard on that as of late.
And it's a great weapon for her, because everything about almost every race in the country starts with Donald Trump. It's either a question about are you supporting him or not, or it's a question about, vote straight ticket so that Donald Trump has no chance. And there's two ways to look at Toomey's position. There's the sort of the political way, and there's the sort of humanist way. If you look at it from the political way, he's done a smart thing, because Pennsylvania still has a lot of patches of support for Trump. And as a Republican, Toomey doesn't want to piss those people off. I mean, you've seen in other states where Republicans have disavowed Trump publicly and have been booed for doing so. So Toomey has to kind of straddle that issue and do essentially what he's doing, saying that, look, I don't agree with the guy on a lot of things. I think a lot of his comments have been despicable, but I'm not prepared to say that I can't or won't ever support him. Now, if you look at it, and again, I mean, that's politically, that's probably a smart thing to do. If you look at it as a humanist, you say, well, what does that tell you about the person? You see someone who has dragged the civility of American politics about as low as it's ever been, in modern history anyway. And you can't stand up and say, look, he's wrong. There's nothing about him that I support or endorse. I want to make that clear. I don't believe anything that he has said is good for our country, and go from there. Some variety of that to show a human side, particularly when it comes to the more recent comments about women.
And you talk about that human side and the comments that Donald Trump made in reference to women with on that tape with Billy Bush. And Pat Toomey's response on Twitter to that tape, while many senators were disavowing Trump and saying that they wouldn't vote for him, Pat Toomey simply said Donald Trump's comments were outrageous and unacceptable, period. That was the only thing. And I saw, on Twitter, he took a lot of heat for that and not actually standing up and saying anything really substantial on it.
Yeah, and I think that's problematic, especially for women voters. I mean, most of women voters that I've talked to, most of the women that I know, that was it. I mean, that finally, even if they were inclined to support Trump or had a lot of questions about Hillary Clinton, that kind of did it for an awful lot of people, and particularly women. So there was an opportunity there. If he ever wanted to separate himself, that was the time to do it. And, if you don't do it over that, I guess you're not going to do it. And, guys, Frank Bruni from the New York Times has a really terrific op-ed piece in the paper. He's such a good writer in today's New York Times when he talks about, Frank is openly gay, and he begins by saying, I'm not a father and I'm not a husband, and then notes that most politicians begin their comments about Trump's comments by saying, as a father of 3 daughters, or, and goes forward. And Bruni's point is, why do you have to be a parent or a spouse married to a woman to be offended by this? The comments were universally offensive. So politicians like Pat Toomey kind of hide behind, things, say, oh, they're offensive, they're awful. And, well, if they're that bad, then why do you support this guy, or why don't you completely disavow him?
Joining us on WHIP Radio right now is John Baer, who is a political columnist for the Daily News. He writes about politics and government. He's done so since 1987. John, you just talked about Donald Trump's comments in that conversation with Billy Bush from 2005, and that's obviously had significant pushback. And since then, Trump has gone on a tweet storm against Speaker of the House Paul Ryan and attacking what he has said is disloyal R's. In the state of Pennsylvania, for the most part, it's been relatively close in the polls between Clinton and Trump. Most polls having Clinton with a decent enough lead in PA. Do you think those comments were ultimately the nail in the coffin for him in Pennsylvania, or do you think he still has a chance at winning it?
I really never thought he had a chance of winning Pennsylvania. I mean, every cycle since 1988, Republicans have said, this is a state that can be in play because of our demographic. And every year since then, it hasn't been in play. I mean, we are in presidential years because of the disparity in registration, because of our demographic, and because of the voter turnout capacity in Philadelphia. You can win this state, guys, with 10 counties out of the 67 if you get Democrats to vote. The Democratic candidate is going to win a presidential every time. And even a flawed candidate like Clinton as you point out, has had a pretty consistent lead in Pennsylvania, particularly in the last 3-4 weeks, and even if you average her numbers now, they're around 6 to 8 points. So I don't think we've seen the full measure yet of the Trump hot mic tape. It's not like it's going to get better. If anything, it should increase her lead a little bit.
And so, John, I saw you wrote an article about the debate that took place in St. Louis. What kind of stood out to you about the town hall format? We were discussing it on here. Some of the things that I think were a little interesting is I don't know if I particularly liked him kind of following her around the stage, and just some of the time, some of his mannerisms on stage. It was an interesting debate. I thought he pointed out the flaws in her that I feel like the Republican base wanted him to.
Yeah, there's no question he was much stronger and better focused in this debate. But the hijinks, like bringing the women ahead of time, having them seated in the audience, going after Bill Clinton, who, by the way, is not on the ballot. I mean, the Trump people love to make the false comparison between what Trump said and what Clinton did. What Clinton did is old history, and he's not on the ballot. Trump is running for president right now. And you're right, the kind of walking around behind was just a little bit, at a minimum, disconcerting. It just kind of took a little focus off of what Hillary Clinton might have been saying at the time. But I'm not a big fan of the town hall format, simply because questions tend to be very general. And I'm thinking of the question was, can you be a president for everybody? I mean, how do you get? There isn't either one of them going to say no. So you're just going to get some pandering general answer and soak up 4 minutes of time. So I've never been a great fan of that. I do like using questions from citizens, and you can do that easily through social media and let moderators ask those questions and then answer up on it. And actually, guys, for years I've written that these debates are just shows. If you really wanted to inform the American people, there'd be no audience, there'd be no moderator. You put the two candidates at a table and let them talk to each other for an hour.
Joining us on WHIP Radio right now is John Baer, political columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News. Last question here for you, John. The third and final debate is next Wednesday, actually, so it's 7 days away. Chris Wallace will be the moderator from Fox News. What do you expect in this upcoming debate? Myself and Ryan talked about it at length. I happen to be a fan of how Anderson Cooper and Martha Raddatz dealt with the town hall as opposed to the way Lester Holt did it. How do you think the third debate's going to play out?
I think it's going to be very tough. Chris Wallace, whether you like Fox or whether you like him or not, asks pretty pointed questions and doesn't let people slip off the hook. I mean, I think he's very good. And there'll be a lot of pressure on him to deliver in a way that maybe Lester Holt did not, and in a way that the town hall didn't provide for. So, and obviously it'll be a determinative debate because generally speaking, people thought Hillary did extremely well in the first debate. People thought Trump managed to stay alive in the second debate. So this is an opportunity for both candidates. It'll be well worth watching, and I'm predicting that Wallace will do very well.
John Baer from the Philadelphia Daily News. John, thanks so much for joining us here this afternoon.
Guys, thanks for having me.